All right, we're started.
Hello and welcome to Equipping for Leadership Session 2. We're going to be talking about why lead in this session. I'm Cory Martin. I'm Associate Pastor here at the church.
And I'm Mike.
Pastor Mike. We're wanting to continue our training for leadership. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about why should people lead in the church. And we're going to be talking about motivations. Good motivations and maybe not so good motivations. And that is kind of going to be our objective here. So we're going to start by just having Mike share a little bit about why he has been leading in the church. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what has led me to lead.
All right. Well, I'm going to take the screen down here for just a second so we can just see ourselves a little bit clearer. And so, all right. So what I would like to say is, what is it that caused me to begin to lead, in ministry, in the church, that sort of thing. And the reality is I've been doing this. My dad was a pastor, so I've been doing this kind of my whole life. In one sense, I saw this in the church. And so I just yeah, okay, that's kind of, when you see somebody else, near you doing it, you just, kind of assume that you're doing it. And then I, immediately began to help with VBS when I was a kid, and I helped lead singing. I like to sing, and so all of those things were part of what I was doing and why I was doing it from the very beginning. And so my dad was always a hero of mine, and I saw him as someone to emulate because of that. So because of that, I'm not positive we're going to talk about some bad motivations to lead. Certainly my motivations were not always pure in that respect. I don't think that I really did had the perfect motivation initially for this. But as time went on, I did make a commitment. I wanted to do something big for God. I wanted to have, be part of what he was doing in the world. And so I decided I was going to, become a pastor at some point. And, therefore I, made a commitment to be a Christian leader. And I had got engaged in college ministries, in a summer ministry program, lots of different things. Oftentimes I ended up being someone who led because that was the right thing to do. It was kind of a needs driven. And again, that we're going to talk a little bit how that can be misused. But for me, at least, that was, some of my motivation. Now, as time has gone by, I do believe my motivations have been refined a little bit. And certainly some of the things I do, even as pastor, are because somebody's got to do it. And I'm the one that's here. But my overall motivation to be a pastor is because I feel called by God to do this thing. And, the calling, I made a commitment when I was 12. And then when I was 16, a further commitment towards this. And God has just constantly been saying, yeah, you should be involved in serving other people, and then really helping to lead other people. So that's been some of my personal motivations as I go along. And as part of that, I think the legitimate, thing, and I've always kind of said this, that people are the purpose. And so there's a mission of the church, but the people are the purpose. And so I want to make sure that I am leading towards the overall mission is to say, I love these people, and what's best for people is that they become followers of Jesus. So wanting them to become Jesus followers, disciples of his. So hopefully, even though my motivations aren't always completely pure, that ultimately is what's driving, my motivations and why I want to continue to do this, because I want to love people well. How about you, Cory?
Yeah, well, for me, I was kind of just thinking over my life and all the different situations I've been leading in. And you know how sometimes at conferences and things, they have these workshops and they tell you, okay, everyone break into groups. And you have to get into little groups of 5 people. And it's like, it seems like I'm always the guy in my group that ends up being the spokesperson and the one that's kind of organizing things for it. So I think in that sense, leadership was a natural gifting for me that other people recognize. People would kind of look around the group and say, well, who's the one that can be our spokesman? And they'd all kind of look at me. And so noticing that there's a natural gifting was one reason. Another one was, I come into any kind of a situation and I see that there are needs to meet, kind of like what you mentioned, Mike, and I want to try to make sure that those needs are being met. And I've got some bandwidth in my life. I'll step up and do that. Possibly that could be negative if I'm just doing it out of a sense of duty, but also it's something where if I'm not seeing anyone else stepping up to an important task for leadership, maybe God's telling me to do that. So that's the other one, meeting needs. I think another reason I've led in the past is that sometimes I like to have control over the agenda and control over the timing in the meeting and how long and how late the meeting will go to. And so when I'm kind of the person in charge, I can make sure that we're moving on in the agenda, and not just so I can have my own way, or trying to be sneaky, but I just want my group to come to the right consensus and then move on and try to be efficient in my meetings. I think another reason for me is I felt that I had a lot of flexibility in my time and in my talents to lead in different ways. And so that would come into, oh, here's something, I wonder why I shouldn't do this. One thing that also spoke to me is in the scripture, God has the parable of the talents, and you know how the parable goes. He gives someone 1 talent and 5 talents and 10 talents, and he expects you to use the talents you're given. And if you don't, there's a judgment that comes, condemnation in the case of the guy that didn't do anything. And so I want to use the talent that God has given me. And then sometimes I've recognized that there are times when I haven't been in a place to lead, and I've had to step back and deal with some things in my life before jumping back in. But that was always a good motivator to get those things straightened out and get those things reckoned with, so that I am able to lead with the integrity that God wants me to lead in. So those are kind of the motivations, some of the things that came up in my thinking about this for myself.
Sure. Good. Well, thank you. We are going to be going on and now talking about some of these things, as you have shared, Cory, and as I shared, some of the motivations that we have are motivations that other people have had as well. And so what I did was I reached out to various people, not just in our church, but friends of mine on social media through time, and say, why have you led? And we basically have collated some of those reasons, and some of the folks, said, yeah, these were really good reasons that we led. And sometimes, it became clear that, hey, I've led in the wrong way, even for the wrong reasons. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to tackle some reasons that are good reasons, and then to a certain extent, we're going to talk about the inverse, how even some of the good things can be bad things at times. So I'm just going to lead us through some slides here, and we're not saying that this is exhaustive. Like, we didn't go through and try to write a leadership book, but I was curious about what might motivate you to lead. Why might you want to lead? And so I think we want more people to lead. That's my whole point with this particular lesson is I want you to step into leadership, and we need you to step into leadership. If you're watching this, it's likely you're already, being asked to consider leadership in some way. And so I want you to do it for the right reasons. And as Cory said, and that may come even more and more as time goes by, what are the right reasons? So let's talk about some of the reasons that we might lead here. All right, so good reasons to lead. Good reasons to lead. And the first one that we had down was meeting needs or duty. It's legitimate that sometimes someone needs to step up. Cory and I both talked about that, hey, you need to step up and do the right thing at times. You can see this as a parent's. Guess what? The kids aren't going to step up, so you've got to do it. And you've got to lead in a household, at a job. Sometimes there's nobody else to step up. Well, in any organization, we need people like this, and to see a need and to go, okay, I'm just going to do it. And I can be, from a class that we've already decided we're going to do, and we need somebody to do it this week. Can you step up and lead this week? Because the main leader is gone. Or a children's ministry that we've got kids, we need somebody to help with a nursery, or helping to serve or organize a meal, whatever that is. Lots of different ways that you can help both serve and then ultimately sometimes even just step into some leadership. And so we want to encourage you to do that, to step into leadership. And one of the things that this was kind of noted in some of our material as kind of a fifth reason, but we only have 4 here, but I'm kind of putting it under here, is people who just step up to meet needs are oftentimes those who are already humble, or the Lord using them like, hey, somebody needs to do this. I want to help. I don't know that I can do it. I don't know, but I'm willing to be obedient. I'm willing to step up. I'm willing because I love people. And so it shows character and it builds character as well. And so, in talking about this one, I think it can, definitely fall into a negative category, which we'll talk about. But ultimately, if you don't do this at some point in your life, then you're probably not being obedient. Cory, what do you think? Anything else to say about this one?
No, just on that last point, there's just a lot of people that emphasize that, said, hey, this is something that I know that Lord wants me to do, and maybe I'm capable, maybe not, but God will supply.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times, especially as you're starting in leadership, this is really where you start. You start with, hey, there is an opportunity. I'm not even sure if I can do it. I'm not sure if I'm going to be any good, but I'm going to try it. And maybe you won't, but it's also one of the ways that you learn. Maybe where some of your gifting is, that sort of thing. And this also then leads to our second one here, which is a sense of calling. And I think this is really important. This oftentimes comes out of examining yourself and praying. And a lot of people had mentioned this, that there's a need that they see, but it's not just that they see a need, but they feel the need. Sometimes this is people starting a new ministry, like, hey, pastor, they'll come to me and say, we need to do this thing. Well, why do we need to do this? Because God is giving them that, and is a legitimate ministry need, but it's also something that they can see. I'm personally called to this. And so that really drives passion oftentimes, because they know that God, has raised them up for this. And some of that, you can see God's plan and God's timing in your life. You might even have at some point in your life, I got a sense of calling, but I can't fulfill it. And it's not until a little bit later that you can actually get into that. And so we see that in scripture. We see that a lot of times God raises people up. I'm just going through, 1 Samuel, but one of the things that we see, like Samuel was raised up for that time. We think in the book of Esther, as Mordecai is challenging his niece Esther to, maybe God has raised you up for such a time as this. And so when you feel that, like, this is my calling, the thing that I should be doing, definitely can be a great reason to start to lead. And oftentimes why people step in is that they've got a particular passion for this particular thing. Anything to say about that, Cory?
Well, just that sometimes the calling isn't just some mysterious thing that comes to you in the night. It could be the pastor literally calls you and says, hey, you want to take up this ministry? Sometimes God calls us through other leaders.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So, kind of related to this, and kind of a little bit like what you were saying as well, is sometimes, and this is several people said this in our church particular. I'm just going to mention Paul Tim here, because Paul has, when he was on the elder board, we got really excited when we talked about our vision statement and making some planning, and that excited him to be part of something that was larger. And I have to be careful on this one because this is a big one for me. I want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I like to see things from the big picture, and that's something for me. Like, hey, how does this thing that I'm doing here relate to the larger thing that the church is doing, that God is doing in the world? And that excites me. And so sometimes there are folks that are really driven, by the big thing. They want to do something meaningful and important, and eternal, and they can see that God is working in the world, and so they're like, yeah, I want to make sure that I'm stepping up. And even this is something I actually want to help people a little bit learn, because sometimes people don't have that. There's more narrow. I have a specific calling to this area or this type of thing, but within the church, to actually function as a church and to work well, to get people to help you and for you to really be helpful to them, oftentimes you need to understand, how does your thing relate to the larger thing? So we're not doing 10 different things. We're maybe doing 10 things, but they're all related to the larger mission of God. You might think of something like this in one of our teachings. We have there are 10 different missions or 10 different silos. But instead, God tends to then bring us back together as a church and saying, no, we're on the same path. You are connecting the disconnected, as our mission statement says, among children. You're doing it among seniors. You're doing it by teaching. You're doing it by helping with hospitality and bringing people in. Like the other night, we helped to host a memorial time for a family. And that was just a hospitality time. We didn't do any teaching that night, but it was a way of connecting to people that aren't otherwise in our church. And somebody working in the kitchen could say, I'm part of the larger mission of the church that way. And so my goal as a pastor is to actually help people understand that they are part of what God is doing in the wider world. And you're not just individually doing something, but you're doing something that, accomplish the larger mission of God too. Cory, you have anything to say about that one?
Yeah, well, just the assumption that when you're joining a mission, there is a mission to join that's been clearly stated, and it's simple to understand. And we'll talk about that, I think, in the next session. But joining the mission involves a mission. So
yeah, and so that's one of the things that I think is important for leadership of a church or an organization, is to help set that. And it's part of, we'll talk about why that's important in leadership, that there is part of helping to set whatever you're doing, helping to set that larger mission for your organization, and connecting maybe to the overall mission, and helping your people under you see, hey, if you're leading, you're probably trying to raise up new leaders. How is it that we're doing this bigger thing together? So that's why I think it's important, even if this isn't your primary motivation. It's actually important to at least understand the bigger mission. Jesus, gives us a mission, or a great commission. The church is supposed to be doing something, and each individual church and each individual Christian has specific callings and giftings and a place in this world. And that's why, we have this as an important reason to lead. We should know, or at least think about, and that can change. We're not saying our particular ministering right now is the way of doing it for all time, but we are saying that that should be at least on your mind.
Right.
Okay. And so our last of the four that we have here, four, not five, four, there we go, is because someone invites you. And Cory mentioned this a little bit ago, but this is obviously way a lot of people start to lead. And frankly, I'll be honest, when people mentioned it, I was like, duh. I mean, I hadn't thought of that. Like, that wasn't one that just came to my mind. But it's really an important one, I think, because people want to be invited in, and they want to be, a lot of times, to be trained up. Maybe they don't even believe it themselves, and somebody else sees that it's likely that if you've been involved in leadership at some level, it's because somebody else saw that in you and invited you to join the team. Almost everything that I've done in leadership throughout the years has involved some level of this. I haven't necessarily inserted myself, but it's been at least a co thing where somebody would say, hey, we need this. Can you come and join us? A lot of times that's one of the main reasons. And it's an important thing because you may not believe that yourself. So it takes somebody else saying, no, God has gifted you. I see this in you. Would you please come and help me? And sometimes, again, it can be just meeting a need. I need help. A leader calling, I need help. Please come help me. We need to fill this place. But that's maybe how you start as well. And God uses that. And in the church, we're supposed to. We see in Ephesians 4 that the lead of one of the responsibilities of like the elders and the pastors is, in fact, to raise up the ministers of the church. And so one of my goals in this entire teaching time and within the church then is to equip leaders and encourage and exhort and raise up new leaders, because that's what it takes to make new disciples. I can't do it, all the discipleship, all the things necessary. How are you involved in that as well? And so it takes more than just me doing that. Anything else on that, Cory, do you see?
No, invitation is the way that I've been asked. I know a lot of times in my history that I've been invited to do something. Sometimes I've had to say, well, I will give it a try. You're not always giving away your life forever. Sometimes you can lead on a tentative basis. And then maybe after trying it out and checking to see, is this really aligned with my gifts? You can say yes and keep going, or you can say, hey, I think we need to give this over to someone else. I don't think I'm quite the right person for this position.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's one of the things that, again, falls on the top leadership, on those who are inviting others in. If we are learning to do this right, we are trying to help you define, boundaries for what you're doing. Yeah. And so we're not just saying, hey, come and do this thing forever, because that really does happen. Hey, you get started and then nobody else is there and you never get away from it. And I realize some of you watching this may going, wait a second, that's happened to me. I've been doing this for 10 years and I thought I had a 1-year commitment. Our goal is to be better at that. Yeah. And so to help, invite you in, and then also really to, you should be evaluating, just as you have a passion to do something, you should be evaluating. If somebody calls me to this, is this what I'm called to? Or maybe I don't know, so I'll try it. Is this what I'm still called to? Or was this something that was effective or not? So just because you've been invited doesn't mean that you need to do that for all time. Right. And which leads me to some of the negative reasons, the bad reasons to lead, because they're kind of an inverse at times of what we see on the good reasons. So the first one is duty, which we said is a good thing, or can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. Oftentimes, I think ministries run their course. And frankly, we shouldn't be doing that anymore. And we don't know that because it's just, it's all the way we've always done it. And nobody really is evaluating whether or not this is effectively accomplishing the mission that God has given the church. And because of that, we just think we got to keep filling this position. And you might be the next man up, the next woman up. Oftentimes women are very good at meeting the duties. In fact, they end up, things fall on well, we need it done. Okay, I'll do that. And so I think, again, while there can be a good sense of I'm going to accomplish that, it's also important to evaluate, is that the only reason that I'm doing it? Because I'm just dutiful. Certain people, that's their personality and they're great servants, but they can end up doing things over and over and over. And, because they're just there, we're just going to keep running the ministry regardless. So, Cory, anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, lurking behind that will be a resentment that might crop up, because that's just, I'm doing this because I've gotta, and I'm the person that's stuck with it, and we don't want that. We don't want resentment in our leadership.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks. The next one then is pride. And this again kind of goes along with us, perhaps a sense of calling. I've seen this in pastors, frankly, people who go into ministry, they want to do something significant, but it can very easily be, I want to be seen as doing something significant.
Mm.
And that's, being up front or being the leader, or I can't feel value in my life unless somebody gives me some praise. I'm thinking of a Progressive commercial that I just has come out recently. This Progressive Insurance, when they're talking about some flood in the basement of their house and how they're going to tweet or post about this on social media, and they're all talking, well, you should say this or you should say this and the one person says, well, we could just not post about it at all, and then they all stop. Oh, and they laugh and they said, no, we take our value from validation that everybody gives me. And I think in our day and age, it's the clicks and the likes, and ministry can be that. Going into ministry, we can have that. I want to either be seen as important, or I want to be, in control of something. Even as you mentioned earlier, Cory, sometimes there can be a good and a bad to, to something, but it's like I, and it's not about God. And so that's where you have to watch out. Is your sense of calling really from God, or is it simply a matter of, hey, I want to do this and I need to do this in a kind of a negative way? Anything else on that one, Cory?
Pride is a lurking and sneaky thing. And, it's like, it could also be, what will this look like on my resume going forward? I want to have these really nice, all these things that look really good on a future resume when I'm trying to lead somewhere else. That's not quite what church leadership is going to be about. And pride is the opposite of humility. And we kind of highlighted the importance of humility in our leaders.
Yeah, and we'll talk about character in one of the other lessons, character of a leader. This is one of those places where it really should be different than the world. Because in the world, getting ahead, you're oftentimes told that you've kind of got to put yourself forward and got to make it important and you got to get ahead. And so, when we see some gurus in the world encouraging, they may in fact encourage you to do the very thing that the Bible says the opposite. No, you need to put yourself in last place and have somebody invite you forward. The first shall be last and the last shall be first, as Jesus is talking to his disciples who are trying to figure out who's going to be number one in his kingdom.
Right.
And so this is kind of something, but you're right, it is very sneaky. And even in good motives, this is what we were talking about earlier, is we can have mixed motives. And so even in good motives, this is one that can really slide in there as well. And so go to the next one. It's similar that we had. Number 3 is joining the mission, but we could be really excited about the wrong thing. We see this some with when somebody has their own agenda. They're really excited about their thing. And so they come into a larger organization or a church and they're like, listen, God has called me to do this, but it's not in alignment with what the church is going. It may not even be wrong in the sense that God maybe is calling you to that, but he may not be calling you to that in this church. And so that you have to be careful. There's an example in scripture with Paul and Barnabas. They had gone out on a missionary journey together, and then they broke up after that missionary journey. And we sometimes think in terms of, was Paul right? He wanted to go out and he didn't want to take this fellow that had left them on their first journey, John Mark. And Barnabas says, no, we need to take him along, give him a second chance. And Paul is like, no, I am on this really severe mission. I need people committed that are going on this mission with me. And Barnabas is like, well, no, we got to come alongside. His name meant son of encouragement, had been one of the first to come alongside Paul himself. And you're like, well, who was right and who was wrong? I'm not convinced that either of them were wrong. in that case. I think it's possible that they simply had different missions they should be on. And in fact, that they both did the thing that God really called them to. They just weren't called together to do that. So if you are passionate about a mission and it's not where the church is going, and the church leadership says, no, that's not what, how we're going to go forward on mission, then I would say maybe God is calling you somewhere else then. And I don't want necessarily, I'm not saying people leave the church, but I am saying if you have such a passion, and it's a really good thing, then in fact, God might be leading you to someplace else. But I would also examine that as well, making sure that it's not just your mission. We have these projects that become, hey, I want to do this. Because I think we should live in community, and that should at least be affirmed by somebody else. I love the little phrase that if you think you're a leader and you're going about and doing something and there's nobody following you, you're just someone that's out for a walk. and so that's where, understanding, am I on mission together? Is the church working together? I think that's important. And then the other thing is, you could be really excited about something that God not only hasn't called you to do, but isn't called the church to do. There are some things that we can get confused about. Doing good works. And I'm going to do good works. We have the food pantry here at the church, and that's not a bad ministry. That's a separate thing from the church. Our church hosts. We support it, but it's not directly the ministry of the church. But if you had something like that, well, I want to set up, a homeless housing in Oakland, where we're located, or in one of our towns around here. Well, maybe that's what the church, but maybe not. And maybe the way you go about it wouldn't even be a good thing to do. And so people can get really excited again about the wrong mission. And so that's where examining what does the church, what is their mission? And then second, what is God called me to do? And is that in alignment with the church? Cory, you have anything to say about that?
No, just it's always good in life to hold things loosely and just be open to God to tell you things that you hadn't thought of yet. So
good. All right. And our last one here is the opposite. So, and this can be, again, part of the thing where somebody's asked you, and if you're a people pleaser, I'm a middle child. Middle children a lot of times are people pleasers. And so, oh, okay, they asked me, I'll do it. And I'll keep doing it because they asked me. And, this can actually be a codependency that's not healthy. And so you need to examine, is this something that you really should keep doing, that you should be part of? You're doing it, again, the same with duty. It's kind of a duty towards a person instead of just an organization. It can create a lot of resentment if you keep doing it for that reason, and it'll lessen your passion. You won't have a good passion for leading at that point. Cory, anything to say on that one?
No, but one of the leadership skills is knowing how to say no to people and how to say that in a constructive way, because it's not always a bad thing to say no.
What was that word again?
No.
No. Okay. I'm not very good at that one. So that's something that some of these things are lessons that I'm still learning. So just to let you guys know that.
There you go.
So, so I want to end with just a couple of questions here. First of all, I want to say that I think you should be serving in the body, and many of you should be stepping into leadership in some capacity. I think it's important. The Apostle Paul talked about one of his motivations in 1 Corinthians 9:16. He says, "For if I preach the gospel, I have no reason to boast, because I am compelled to preach, and woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." Was that a duty? Yeah, but it was a duty of relationship with God. In other words, God drove him, compelled him to do this thing. And ultimately, he talks a lot about the fact that he had learned to find peace and joy and a ability to be content in all these circumstances. And so I think the primary reason that you should lead in the church is because you're in relationship with God, and you can't help but be compelled by that relationship to love him and to love his body well. And you want to love people through sharing their good news with them, through in some way helping to make more Christ followers and raise them up to maturity. So for me, that's like the number one reason, the compelling, that when I spend time with Jesus, he is the one that's actually leading me. It's not about me leading. He leads me, and I want to go do this. And then these two questions, are you leading already? And why are you leading? I think it's good to examine those questions. And anything else to say about those, Cory?
Yep. Well, we want to make sure that people are watching this video when they're thinking about leadership in the church. What are your motives? What are the things that are kind of driving you to want to be a leader? And are there any of these bad leadership motivations that are kind of touching you? You don't want to just use, if you can find one negative thing to say, well, that's a reason I shouldn't lead at all. Sometimes you just need to pray through that and learn how to release that and really focus on the positive motivations. All of us struggle with some of those negatives. All of us have had reasons why we've maybe picked up a leadership position for the wrong reason. But don't stay out of leadership just because you've got a little bit of negative in the mix. Keep praying to God to help you be a pure leader.
Yeah, and if you wait for perfection, you'll never start.
Nope.
And so that's the thing.
Any leader.
That's right. You've got to start somewhere. And you may be looking at somebody else and saying, "Oh, look at them! They've got it all together." But the reality is, all of us in leadership, we're still growing. Jesus is the ultimate leader. Before you can be a good leader, you have to be a good follower, and just understand that we'll always be under him. Everything we do is just under him in the first place. And so that's my encouragement to you, is to follow him well. And then in following him, just like every good Christian leader through history, it's following him well, and then it's stepping out in his power with the Holy Spirit walking with you. All right. Well, thanks.
Okay.
Session then, I think we're going to be talking, is it the character of a leader? Might be in session 3. So that's, again, just a general character of a leader, and we hope to have you join us then too. God bless.
You bet.